Hello, welcome to today's project that we're going to be working on. We're going to be learning how to take a raster image and convert it into a vector outline. That way we can combine the two together, the raster image and the vector. We can use the raster image to etch with the laser, and we can use the vector to cut with the laser. And to do that, we're going to need some images and some software. So we're going to go to Moodle. And in week 2, we're going to scroll down. You're going to see a list here. One of the pieces of software is Inkscape. You want to download it, install it if you haven't already. Or if you're in the lab, you don't need to. It should already be on the computers. And also Autodesk software for students, which you can get for free. You will have to set up an account. And if you use your .edu email address, it's all absolutely free. And when you get those two installed, I'm not going to go through that process. You can jump back in and keep watching the video to see what we're going to do. The other thing that we need is some images. So I'm going to scroll even further down in the class, and you're going to see 2 images here. We're going to mainly work with this image, and you can use this image to try it again for a good, second try. But for this one, I downloaded a vector-looking image. It's not actually vector, it is a bitmap made up of pixels. And we're going to just right button on it, save image as, and I'm going to find a folder on my desktop. I called it Fox. And you can see it says Red Fox had no background, and it's a PNG file, which means anything that's white in the background, it's been saved to where that white can be turned on and off and become invisible. It's not necessary. It just makes things easier in some aspects. For our purposes, it really doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and do save. And you can see it's downloaded and saved. So I can now switch over to the software that I'm going to be using. The first software that I'm going to use is Inkscape. And so I'm going to run up Inkscape. And you might get a splash screen first, and then you're going to get this document that says, hey, how do you want to start the new document? This might be turned off, and it might just load up the page automatically. I'm going to go ahead and do new document, and then it's going to come up and show me a blank page. Now, yours might look a little different depending on which version of the software. I'm running 1.4. I think the latest version is 1.412 or 3. I can't remember. But this is basically a blank page. Yours also might be white instead of gray. It depends on what settings you chose for your color scheme. I chose the darker one because it's easier for me to pick out the workspace against the background when it says gray. And so the first thing I want to do is load that Fox image in. So I'm going to go to File, Open, and I put it on my desktop, and you can see it right here. So I'm going to pick on it, choose Open. And it's going to ask me, okay, how do you want to import this in? Keep the defaults. There's nothing special about this image. We don't need to rotate or anything, so just pick OK. And it should pop in like this. Now notice that the white background originally turned gray. That means that transparent PNG white has disappeared. It's actually there, but you can see that it's transparent. There's abilities to turn that on and off, but we're not going to be using it, so we're going to leave it exactly the way it is. The first thing I want to do is I want to show you that if I were to zoom up on this, and I'm using the control key on the keyboard, I'm holding the control key down and using the mouse wheel to zoom in, you can see this is actually very jagged edges. This is made up of pixels. It's a raster image. The nice thing about this image, though, is it's made up of very distinct colors, and there's really well-defined edges throughout the image. So this will be a very easy image to convert over into vector. Now, if you were using a photograph, you could do it. It just wouldn't be very well defined, and it would be a lot more difficult to do. The next week, we'll actually be looking at how to convert photos over into where you can etch them. But the ability to outline this pretty easily, you really want a more simplified image like this. So to start off, we want to figure out where these edges are. So I'm going to go up to the pull-down menus, and there's one called Path, and Trace Bitmap is what we're using, or Shift-Alt-B. This is going to open up a really small dialog on the right. It's basically a work panel. You can grab the 3 little dots in the center left and drag that to make it larger and easier to see. I'm going to drag it. If you drag it too far, it's going to kind of shrink back down or something like that. So I'm just going to go about halfway or a little less than halfway. And I can see very clearly it's found some edges throughout this image, and the easy one is the outer edge. It's very well defined, and there's other edges inside of here that it seems to have found pretty easily. I can actually control what it uses to look for edges and what it doesn't, and that's this threshold up here. We're using what's called a brightness cutoff. Now that threshold determines how bright a pixel, and that's going to determine which brightness you want to use for an edge. Now you can see white is the brightest, then this lighter yellow orange, and then the yellow in the eyes and the light blue here. Those are all defined at different values for brightness. And I can grab the slider and slide back and forth, and as I slide back and forth, it goes through those different values of brightness until it finds that particular edge along those brightnesses. So I'm going to scroll this all the way to the left because I want as few as possible. And really the black, I can't get any less than that. So I'm kind of stuck with that black. There's a little bit of gray in the nose that I can dial out by going pretty low. If I go too far, it's all going to disappear because even the black disappears. And if I go really close to the bottom, you can see that there's a little dots showing up. That's too far. That's because it is made up of pixels and there might be a few gray pixels along these edges, and that's going to just cause problems. So I want to go ahead and make sure I can see a nice clear black and white. So I'm going to put in somewhere around maybe 1 for this particular image. Every image is going to be different, and I got really nice clear. Now, if for some reason this display messes up, you can always do update preview and it'll recalculate it. Now that I like this, I'm going to pick apply, and it's very important you only pick it one time. Every time you pick apply, it's not going to really do anything or show anything. It's just going to apply it and put the copy of the edges on top of the image we already have. And if you do it 5 times, you're going to have 5 of them on top of each other. So click once, you'll see it flash and disappear. Now, when it disappears, you know that it worked. A lot of students will update preview, apply again, update preview, apply again, and that just creates more and more. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just move my cursor over to his nose, and I'm going to hold the left button down and drag it to the left. And you can see it created that same shape outline that it did over here when it was tracing it out. I'm once again going to use the control key, and I'm going to zoom up on a section that are kind of the same. And you can see the difference. Vector is a perfectly smooth, calculated mathematical arc. The raster image is still bitmaps, and it's made up of pixels. So this bitmap is made up of pixels, and you can see that really jagged edge. You could actually use this on the laser. You wouldn't want to cut with it because the laser would be jumping back and forth trying to cut that hard edge, and it just doesn't look very pretty. Where this, it can just continuously move along a nice smooth edge. That's why we're doing this raster bitmap to a vector outline. Now I don't need my original raster bitmap anymore, at least not for now. So I'm going to hit the delete key. I had it selected. I hit the delete key. I'm going to move this back onto the page. It doesn't really matter where you put it, but I like to put it back on there so I can see it. I'm going to zoom back in. And now all we need to do is save it out as vector lines to another program that we're going to be using, which is AutoCAD. There is an ability to get rid of the solid fill and see the outline. You can always go up to Object and pick on Fill and Stroke, and you get another little tool over here. There's the original trace bitmap. Here's Fill and Stroke. And what you would have to do is X out the fill, and then you pick on the solid or fill to see it or not see it. I'm going to X it out, and I've gotten rid of the black inside of the lines. If I go to Stroke and Paint, I can then turn on the lines that are actually making the borders of those edges. These are the actual vector lines. The only problem is they're too thick. There are actually 2 sides to it, an inside and an outside of each one of these lines. So I also need to go to stroke style, and right now the width is set to 1, which is pretty thick, and the laser will cut that twice. So I need to hit this drop down and choose hairline, and that makes it one thin line so that it doesn't have a double-sided on it. You could use this as well. Luckily now, most programs, you can leave it as a solid infill. I'm just going to go back and make it solid by picking on this blue square here under the fill option. And just to show you that you can just bring it over and you don't have to do all of this. Sometimes I have to do it because I maybe want to use this program to break it up, but for what we're doing, we can do it inside of AutoCAD. So I'm now going to go up to File. I'm going to do Save As. If I do Save, it's going to overwrite my old one. So I want to do Save As. It's going to bring up a dialog window. Once again, I'm going to go to my desktop and the Fox folder. And inside of here, I can keep the same name if I want, which I think I will. Notice though it is a Inkscape SVG file. Now, SVG file is a very specific vector type file that a lot of vector programs can load, like Inkscape, Adobe Illustrator, things like that can open these SVGs, and it's really nice. But what we're going to be using, AutoCAD cannot open an SVG, so we have to save it out as a different file type. So I'm going to hit the drop down and I'm going to choose DXF, which you can see it on the far right, or other words, look for AutoCAD DXF R14. There's two versions. Use the latest version. Either one will work, but the latest version does a little bit better quality. So I'm going to pick on AutoCAD R14. I'm going to keep the same name. Notice the extension is now changed to .dxf. If you don't see the extension in here, it's because your Windows is set up not to show extensions. You could have to go through your Windows properties and there's a menu that you can turn that on. I'm going to go ahead and pick on save. And it's going to ask me, okay, how do you want to save this? Now, a lot of times these two will be checked. And really the only one that you don't want checked is this use low polyline type of line output. It's a special line output that we're not going to use. It's used for another type of software that Autodesk makes. So uncheck that. Use document unit as base unit. Right now, we don't care what the units are, so you can leave that checked. If it's turned off, that's okay. You don't have to. Or you can come down here and pick what you want it to be, foot, inches, millimeters. Right here, it says unitless. And that's pretty much what we're going to leave it because we're going to change the scale anyway once we get it loaded. So I'm going to pick OK. And it's going to take a little bit to convert all that over and save it. Once it's done, we can close this piece of software and run up AutoCAD. I tend to leave both running because my computer can handle it. Simply because if something goes wrong, I don't have to reload everything, retrace it, and redo everything. I can just go back in here and manipulate it and then resend it out. So now I'm going to run up AutoCAD. AutoCAD might take a little bit to load up depending on your computer system. Also, how many files you've used it with. It's going to go through the entire display here to try to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that DXF file. So on the far left tools, I'm going to pick on Open. I'm going to once again choose my desktop, and I'm going to choose Fox folder. And inside there, I don't see anything. That's because we're looking at a .dwg, which is a drawing file. We're looking for a .dxf, which stands for data exchange file. So I'm going to hit the drop down. Notice there's different things you can choose, and one of them is a DXF. So I'm going to pick on DXF, and then it should show up in my list. So I got red fox head no background .dxf. I'm going to pick on open, and it's going to load it up. And you can see that it's made those lines. Now you'll notice that these lines are actually not perfectly curved. That's because really it can't make perfect curves. What it's doing is it's breaking up the curves into straight lines. But there's enough of them to make it a curve. Like if I pick on this, you can see that it's got a curve here of straight lines, but they have these control points that determine how curved it is. You can actually pick one of these points and move it. And you can see it curved it even more. It's because it's a bigger curve. It needs more segments to make up that curve. I'm going to Control Z to get rid of that. But this is our vector outline. The only problem is it's not in the proper format that we can manipulate it and allow the laser cutter to cut it easy. Right now, these are all made up of different segments or lines. These are individual lines. The laser cutter might go here and then skip over here and then over here and up here, and that just slows it down. We want it to do one continuous. We also don't necessarily want to cut everything at once. For instance, this inner area of this face and stuff, I don't want to cut through that. I just want to do the cut outline. So what I need to do first off is to make this DXF file into an actual drawing file. And to do that, we have to do a couple of things. The first thing we want to do is to convert it over, we want to go down here to where you type in a command. There's a command called flatten. And when you type in flatten, you can click on the word below it or hit the enter key, either one. It's going to say select objects to convert to 2D. I'm going to click really quickly, and I'm not going to hold the button down. If you hold the button down, you get this curvy line. That's not what I want. I want to click once really quick in the upper left, drag a rectangle. I do not have the button held to the lower right, and notice everything is inside the blue rectangle. That's what's going to be selected. I'm going to click a second time, and then it all turns blue. That means it's selected. Now down at the bottom, you should always look down here because it tells you what it's looking for. It says select objects. I'm done selecting, so I'm going to hit the enter key, and then it's going to ask me another question. You can look down at the bottom again. Remove hidden lines. We're going to say yes. There might be a line on top of a line, and it's hidden. So we're going to tell it, yes, I want to get rid of those. I don't want to see them. Just delete them. So I'm going to hit enter, and now you just have to sit there and wait. You'll see the little circle, and you can notice it's going and tracing around it. For some displays, it won't show it, but on my particular one, it's showing me exactly where it's reconverting all these lines into something that's more usable. And as it goes along, I'm going to watch, but you're waiting for the little circle to stop. If you zoom in and zoom out, it will mess up the drawing. So you just have to kind of sit there and be patient and wait. And there's a lot of lines, so it can take a while. Once it's captured them all, now it's going to go back in and rewrite all the lines, and that's what you see that flashing. And once it's done, your cursor will come back. And you'll notice that it's a little bit different now. Now it's got these square points in here, and it truly is straight lines. And you can see it's not doing the curve like it is before. This, however, is a much more usable type of line than those original curved lines because they're a very specific type of curved line, mathematically calculated. We will eventually make them curved again, but in a different way. What I really want to do now is I want to save this out as a drawing file. But before I do that, I'm actually going to join all these lines together because I don't want to have to sit there and pick each one of these to get that outer edge. Or maybe I want to pick his ear. I don't want to pick every single one of his edges here. So I'm going to hit escape to unselect those. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a command called pedit, which stands for polyline edit. And you notice when I type in pedit, it's at the top. You can hit enter or pick on it. And once again, look down here. It says select or multiple. Well, I definitely have multiple lines I want to do, so I'm going to pick on multiple. And once again, it says select object, so I'm going to pick my upper left corner real quick, pick my lower right corner. When it all turns blue, I know I have it all selected. It's asking me anything else. I'm going to hit enter to tell it no. And then a little dialog up here, a pop-up shows up, or down here at the bottom. Either one will work. I want to join these together. I can pick join here, or I can pick join right where the little dialog window pops up. I'm going to pick on join right here, and it's going to say, okay, enter fuzz distance. Okay, what in the world does that mean? Well, imagine two lines that are end to end, but they're not really touching end to end. It traced it out, and maybe one pixel was white, so that left a space between the two lines. What this allows you to do is pick a value to push those two ends together and join them. Now, I know good and well Inkscape does not put those little gaps in there. We can leave this at 0.000 and it will work perfectly fine. Just to show you though, I'm going to put in 0.001, which is a pretty small gap just in case. I'm going to hit enter and it's going to say, okay, I added 1042 segments together into 16 different polylines. That's 16 different shapes in here. So that actually did pretty good, and it might not have completely connected all of it. We're going to see here in a second. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit enter to tell it I'm done joining, and you can see it now says, okay, type a command, we're back at the start. Now when I pick on this, notice I can now pick on each individual piece, and they're selected as a whole. And those points are still there. They're just, all connected now. And that's exactly what we wanted to do. So now I'm going to go up to my save. Save as again. We don't want to save a DXF. We're going to do a save as. This time we're going to save an AutoCAD.dwg, which is usually default. So it automatically came up. Same folder in my Fox folder. I'm going to pick on save. And we now have a drawing file. You're going to have to close this drawing because it's still considered the old format. It's just resaved as another file. So I'm going to close this file. I'm going to choose open. I'm going to pick on that. Well, look, it's still a DXF. I need to go down here and make sure it says DWG is the file format that I want. And there's the file format that I need. Background.dwg. It'll show up no matter what this extension says. If there's a drawing file, it'll find it. And you can see what it looks like here. So I'm going to pick on open. And it looks like it loaded it right back up. Everything looks good. They're all still connected. So we now have an outline of all our parts here. This is pretty good, except that if I were to cut this out, it would cut out the eyeballs, the ears, the outer piece in whatever order. And the problem with that is it might cut out this outer shape first, fall down, and then all these pieces would never get cut out or burned. So what we need to do is define colors, and we can tell the color which order to do the etching and cutting. We're actually going to mark some of the lines and cut some of the lines. So the first thing I'm going to do is I could go in here and pick these one at a time, or I can come down here to the lower right, click once, go to the upper left a little bit. Notice it's green instead of blue. Green means that it just has to touch the object. Blue means it has to be within the rectangle. Here the rectangle just touches, but notice it's not touching the two right ones at all. If I go up a little bit, it might, but I'm just going to go and click, and you see it got them all but those two. So I'm going to click here and do another little square one from the lower right to the upper left, and that picked all the inside pieces. I'm going to change their color. When you do that up here, notice it says white at the top. I'm going to hit the drop down. I can only use for the large laser cutter these first 7 colors. I don't recommend using the white because white's hard to see on white. I'm going to make this one green. Why green? That just happens to be the color I always use for doing marking, where I'm not going to cut all the way through. I'm just going to burn the surface. So I'm going to pick that one. It'll still be selected, so I can hit escape and it should stay green. Now the outline, though, I'm going to set that one to red. So I'm going to pick red. Let's hit it. Escape. And we now have the outline as red. So now I can tell it to mark this with a low power and cut this out with a red. And you would have an outline of this box, which would be okay. Maybe that's what you want. But I really want the shading that it had from the original image. And this is where a raster image can be used. So we're going to take that original raster image and input it into this vector drawing right here. Okay, so I'm going to go up to there's a little drop down here where it has the A, or I can pick on start, but really what I want to do is below that A, there's a bunch of tabs right here, and these are different ribbon tools. Each one of these tabs has a ribbon with a bunch of tools laid out. It's very common in a lot of software now. But what I want to do is I want to insert by importing that other graphic file that we started with originally. So I'm going to pick on insert, and I'm going to go over to attach. There's a little attach icon. I'm going to click on that and it opens up a dialog window. I'm going to once again go to my desktop Fox folder, if I can find it. There we go. And you can see that I've got my original image that I had and it has that white background. So I'm going to pick on open and it's going to ask me, okay, do you want to put that in a particular place on the screen? Do you want it to be a specific size? Make sure those are checked so that you can specify yourself and choose OK. And it will attach it to your cursor. Now, I'm going to have to zoom in to see it. It's a little rectangle. It's really tiny. Really, this is really big. So I'm going to go ahead just somewhere over here on the right. I'm going to click once, and I can actually size it larger or smaller by dragging away from that point where I picked. So I'm going to pick away a little bit just to get it large enough so I can see both the picture and the outline. I'm going to go ahead and click. And there are different sizes, but we're going to fix that here in a second. I just wanted to make sure that that image came into my software and it looks like everything worked pretty good. Sometimes you'll load an image and this background might be there'll be a bunch of black lines to it or something. Usually that means there's not everything correct with that image. And you need to either go into a paint program and resave it or figure something out to make it come in correctly. But it's rare that that happens. So I'm going to take a look at this and see that, okay, I somehow have to get these two lined up on top of each other, and I also need to make them the exact same size. I have no idea how big they are, and right now I don't really care how big they are. Now eventually I will, but right now I just want them to be the same size and to fit on top of each other. So if I were to pick this image, I picked on the edge of it. You can't pick the middle of it. Let me hit escape so you can see. If I pick on the middle, there's nothing there. It's just a bunch of pixels. AutoCAD can only pick edges and lines, so I have to pick the very edge of the picture, and then it selects it. Or you could do a window around it. by picking the 2 points, and that will also select it. And I'm going to right mouse button, and I'm going to pick on move, and you can see that I can move it around. I'm just going to kind of overlap the two, and you can see that this is in front of the lines. I really want the lines to be in front of the picture. It's just going to be easier to work with. So I'm going to pick on the edge again. I'm going to right mouse button. I'm going to pick on draw order on the pop-up dialog, and I'm going to go to send to back. And what that's going to do is force the picture to go to the back of the drawing, which means it's going to be behind the lines. And now you can see the lines are on top. This will be much easier to see when we get these two the same size and lined up. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate these lines so that they line up with the fox and they're also the right size. The first thing we have to do is decide what point do we want to align with. For instance, the bottom of his chin right here, the fur at the bottom, that point's really good. It's very well defined as a point, and it's also defined kind of as a point with pixels down here. So that's a really good point to choose. You could pick the point where the line touches his nose, the corners of his eyes, the top of the ear. All those would work, but this one's nice symmetrical and it's at the very bottom. So let's do that one. So I'm going to very easily select it all by picking the upper left and the lower right, and notice I picked it all. Now if I were to do it the opposite like I did before, the lower right and the upper left, because the image crosses through the box, even though it's not inside of it, it would still select it, and that's not what I want. So I'm going to do a window by going upper left, lower right, and it picks all the objects. I need to tell it I'm done. So I'm going to, it's already told me that I'm done, so I don't have to repick that. I'm going to right mouse button. I'm going to do the move command, which is right here when the dialog pops up. I'm going to zoom up with my mouse. I'm just using the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. If you press on the mouse wheel, it will pan. If you move the mouse wheel forward and backwards, it zooms in and out. So I'm going to move up to that point. And because this icon down here is blue, that means it's turned on, and that is snap to object. Snap cursor to 2D reference points. The default one, if you hit this little drop-down arrow, is endpoint. It might be midpoint center. There might be several of these picked. Endpoint is the most important one that we're going to be using for this. So I want to make sure endpoint is picked, which it is. So, and this is turned on. So when I move my cursor to that endpoint, notice a little green square pops up. That means it found the end of that line. It even tells you it's an endpoint. So when I click on it, it attaches everything to my cursor. So when I move my cursor around, it moves it. Now I'm going to zoom up on the picture. Now notice if I get too far down, it starts snapping to the lower edge. I want to go to this pixel here. There is no snap to pixel. So I'm just going to have to eyeball this. You can see the two curves. I want them to fall onto the lines of the raster image. So I'm going to go to the middle and click, and now they're lined up pretty much left to right in the very bottom. The only problem is the lines are way too big for the actual raster image. They don't line up. So now we're going to have to scale these lines so that they match the fox image. The problem is, what's the size of this fox image? I have no idea. What's the size of these outlines? I have no idea. And I really don't need to know the exact values. I can let the computer calculate it for me, and that's what we're going to do with the scale tool. So once again, I'm going to draw a window around only the lines. Notice I'm not going past the picture. I'm just going down here at the bottom. And if it doesn't pick one of them, you can always just hold down Shift and pick another line. Or, I'm going to unselect one maybe and see if I can get it unselected. You can see that it's once it's selected, it's hard to do. So I'm going to hit Escape and try that again. So I'm going to miss the red one completely. You can see I missed the bottom one. You just have to go and click on it and it'll add it to the selection, which is very handy. So now that everything's selected, I'm going to right mouse button. I'm going to choose on scale, and it's going to say down here at the bottom and at my cursor, specify base point. You're picking the point that you're scaling towards and away from. And just to give you an example, I'm going to once again zoom up and pick that point at the bottom of the line. It's going to snap to endpoint. And now when I move my cursor around, you can see it getting larger and smaller. Now you could just try to eyeball it. Notice that every time I move my mouse, it jumps above it or below it. I can't really get straight on it. I could zoom in and out, try to get closer. I'm going to actually be exact. And to do that, I'm going to come over here to where it says the word reference down here in the lower left. And I'm going to tell it, hey, figure out what these links are and then make them the same. So I'm going to do a reference. And the thing that I'm scaling is the vector outline. So I'm going to once again go up here and measure the very bottom to the very top of the forehead in the middle right here. So I'm going to measure that distance by picking those 2 points. And now it's asking me, well, what size do you want it to be? The default is 1, which would make it pretty small. Well, I want that forehead line to be right at the top of the picture. So I'm going to zoom up and pick the top of that forehead. And all the other lines will fall into place because they're the exact same size relative to each other. And so now I got the 2 sizes exact, which is really, really handy. And that's the best way to scale items inside of raster images and vectors when you want to combine them, is to use the reference. So this looks pretty good. I could send this to laser, but the only problem is whenever you send something to laser, you better make sure that it fits on the laser, or for that matter, it's the size you want it to be. Let's go ahead and measure this. I want to come up here and pick on home, which gives me back my home ribbon. And you're going to see a dimension icon. To the upper right of that dimension icon is linear. I'm going to pick on that. I'm going to pick the upper right corner and the lower right corner. I'm going to pull out a dimension to the right and click. And if I zoom up on that little bitty mark right there, it's actually text that shows me it's 254.5830 units, which for all purposes, that's 254 inches. I'm sorry, but we don't have a laser cutter that can cut something that large. That's huge. So we actually need to scale this down. I'm going to leave this dimension on here so you can see when we're done, it'll be the right scale. Now, for your assignment, I want you to etch and cut on a 6x6 inch piece of material, specifically the cardboard. Now, when you do the second part of it, you can make it a different size, but the cardboard one, I want it to be a 6x6 inches. So obviously the height of this is taller than, longer than the width. So I'm going to go ahead and scale this up and down to 6 inches, and then the width should be automatic. So I'm going to, once again, draw a window around everything. I'm going to right button, scale, and I'm going to choose that upper right point that we did for the dimension. And once again, I'm going to choose reference. I'm going to pick that upper right again, zoom out, pan down, pick the lower right. That's the first length that I'm measuring. I don't know what it is. Well, I know that's 254. And now when it's connected that way, I can put in the new value. It says, how big do you want that line to be? Well, I want it to not be 199. I want it to be 6. So I'm going to hit enter. And where did it go? It's really tiny. Notice when I pull back and forward on the mouse wheel, it's zooming in and out. And a lot of times students will zoom in and it'll disappear. That's because you don't realize zoom works by zooming into your cursor. So you want to put your cursor on the object, don't click, and then push up on the mouse wheel. And then you can pan it to the middle and then zoom again. And now you can see it's exactly 6 units. So, and we're going to make it 6 inches. So now it's the correct size to fit onto my cardboard at a 6x6. I could make it slightly larger and it would still fit, but I want that little area around it. So I'm going to get rid of that dimension. I'm just going to pick on it. Easier said than done. And delete. Sometimes you have to escape because I was still in a command. So now when I go and pick on it, I should pick it. There we go. This is actually ready to be sent over to laser cutter. The only problem is we've got a bitmap image and we have vector lines. You can send them both at the same time, but the problem is you can't etch and cut at the same time. You have to etch it first, and then you have to go back and cut the lines. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing on our next assignment. But before we do that, I want to kind of add a little bit more to this. I actually want an end product out of this. I just don't want to cut out an etching. I want to make a keychain. So I'm going to add some lines to this to make it into a keychain. For one thing, I don't want my keychain edge to be right up against this black where the red is actually the cutout for this. I actually want there to be like a 1/4 inch of white space all around my object here. So I'm going to zoom up on this, and there's the line that I want to make a copy of, but a 1/4 inch out. So I'm going to use this special command called offset. So I'm going to pick on offset. And down at the bottom it says specify offset distance, or you can pick points. I'm just going to type in 0.25, or if you're a good programmer, you should always put in 0.25, just so it knows it's not 25. And you will also visually see that it's not 25, it's 0.25. I'm going to hit enter and it says, okay, what do you want to offset? Well, I want to pick that red line. And then you can go in or out, up or down. And if you go down, it's going to offset inwards, and you see a really bad red line along the edges of the green one. That's not what I want. I want to go out like this and click. So that offset it 1/4 of an inch. Now notice it made a really large triangle below the picture, which is kind of okay because it's all white anyway and it doesn't matter. And I've got some extra space, so this probably will still fit on a 6x8, I mean a 6x6. So I could probably leave it the way it is, but I don't like how sharp and how far down it's gone. Well, any line that you've got that's all together like that, you'll notice that when I pick it, it chooses the whole thing. I could just pick this point and move it up. I can pick every point, matter of fact, one at a time and readjust it to make it do a little better. And all I'm doing is picking on the blue squares, clicking once to pick it up, click again to put it back down. And so you can go in there and adjust that to make it look a little better. I actually like this one. I kind of wish there was a more definition right here, so I'm going to grab this vertex right here. It's hard to see because it's white on white. I'm going to pick that vertex and move it up a little bit and pick its neighbor just to make it a little bit more straight. Notice I'm snapping to the endpoint, so I'm going to turn that off. It makes it a little bit easier to move them when you select them. And sometimes that's what you have to do. You have to do some cleanup work. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I also want to make a keyhole up here, so I'm going to have to draw a circle, actually 2 circles, one to attach to the keychain and another hole to allow the keyring to attach to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is come up to circle, and because this is organic, I don't need an exact location, but I'm going to go ahead and draw this off to the side because I can't see it all white on white. So I'm going to go over here and click somewhere, and it's going to ask for a radius. I'm going to put in 0.25 for my radius, and that's going to make let me do 0.25 so we can see it. That's going to make a 1/2 inch diameter, so 1/2 inch across that circle right there. And you can see if I pick on it, it's got a little grip in the very middle that I can pick it up and move it over. But it's, like I said, it's white on white. That's too hard to see. So I'm going to go up and change its color. So I've got it picked. I'm going to hit this drop down up here. You can always find the colors because it's near the color wheel. And I'm going to make this one, well, it's going to be an outside edge, so I'm going to make it red. And then now I can move it over. And I'm going to attach it just right above that. I'm not going to be exact. It's just going to be somewhere right above that forehead. Maybe about right there. And that looks pretty good, but now I need to create another circle. This is going to be the hole that's going to be cut out. I need another circle to give it a way to connect to the ears and the forehead so that it's all one piece. So I'm going to use the offset again. Once again, my distance is set to 0.25. I want that to be smaller. I'm going to put it in 0.125, which is 1/8 of an inch. Hit enter. I'm going to pick that circle. I have to zoom up to pick on it. It's kind of hard to see because it's white on white. And you can see everywhere I pick, it's hard to find. I want to go to the outside and pick. And so now I've got 2 circles there. The problem is I can't use that to cut with because they would just be floating in one place and they're not touching the ear on the right. I really need to move this around. The only problem, this cursor on the white background makes it real hard to work with this. So I'm going to do something special with this image. You can't do it with all images. It works with PNG when you have the white set as a transparent background. I'm going to pick on the edge of the image. And up here at the top, you see background transparency. Now, when I pick on that, the background's going to disappear. Like I said, that doesn't work with all images. You have to set it up that way. If you want to know how to do that, you can get with me. I can walk you through a little tutorial on how to make backgrounds transparent. There is a little bit of work to it. But now it makes it much easier for me to pick things. And the thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick both of these circles, pick them up and move them so that they're a little bit further down. And now they're touching both ears. So I have more surface area to create that hole. The problem is these lines right here at the bottom, this one going across here and here, those shouldn't be there. That's just going to cut all the way through, and all these pieces are going to just fall apart. So I'm going to use a command called trim. It looks like a little pair of scissors in the word trim. I'm going to pick on that, and I want to get rid of the bottom of this circle, so I'm going to pick on that. I want to keep that circle, but I want to get rid of the hole in the middle, so I'm going to pick on this piece and this piece. I also don't want these two pieces because that would fall off, so I'm going to pick on this piece and this piece. And you can see if I zoom up, there's a bunch of little lines right here. Those I can just erase. You could keep picking on them, but it's kind of difficult. So I'm going to escape. I'm going to choose on that line. I'm going to choose on that line, and I'm going to hit the delete key. And notice there's still a little piece sitting there. I can either pick on it and move the point, or I can pick on escape, choose trim, and pick that piece, and it'll delete it. And you have to enter to stop trimming. So that's much better. That's actually what I want. Kind of. If you take a look, this is red, right? And this is red, and this is red, and this is red. That means all these pieces are going to cut the same. And if I use this to cut this image out, it's going to cut this as well, and it would just fall apart. So I need to make this one like my green lines. I'm going to pick on this one and set it to green, and then hit escape. That way, we're going to just mark it, not cut all the way through. Another problem we have is if I cut this red part out first, you won't be able to cut the hole out. So I need to make this hole a different color so that I can cut it out before I do the final outline. So I'm going to pick on the circle. I can't use green because I want to cut all the way through. I can't use red because it might do it first. So I'm going to change this color to, we'll try a cyan. And so now I've got three colors, red, cyan, and green, and they're all going to be set to a different value. You'll notice that this and the circle are not joined together. You can try to join them. You'll have a little bit of a difficulty to it. These don't need to be joined together. The laser cutter is actually smart enough to do one continuous one and do the arc. They're two separate ones. It's not going to do part of this and then jump over and then go back. It's going to do this whole one, and right where it left off, it'll continue on. So this is now pretty much ready, except you'll notice that I've got this rectangle that's black. That will also be sent to the laser cutter. It's because we made the background transparent. I actually want to pick on it. I'm going to turn the background back on by turning off the transparency. And we'll notice that it does work. It's still there, and everything looks pretty good. And so on the next lecture, I'm going to actually show you how you take this and send it over to the laser cutter. Till then, we'll see you next time.